why do we learn knowledge? Or why do we do the things that we do? In a lot of those cases, especially for thinking about things that we're doing is part of this idea of a life purpose. It's somehow to become a particular kind of person or an individual. And if we try to generalize it even further, it's more or less a concept of a good person. I'm doing this, I'm studying this because I want to be better, because I want to be good, because I want to live a good life. And when we think about theories of knowledge or theories in ethics, for example, when we're trying to determine whether something is truthful or correct or right, there is this preconceived notion that it's supposed to head towards something that is of the good, is of good. And somehow this idea of good is also quite specific or particular, that when we view our lives, each individual human lives, as a kind of journey towards somewhere, there seems to be this notion that we're heading to a particular kind of place, different from where we are right now, and towards somewhere which a good majority, if not the universal, would perceive as good or as correct. And so we may wake up and do the different things that were required of the day, to answer to the different calls that were being called towards, to take upon various things, and to even simply just move in a particular way, so that we might be able to get to that good, to that concept of our fulfillment as a human person. And I think what that ends up translating, as we try to carry that idea or concept within us, is this notion that there is this one particular image or form of myself that is preferred, that is good, that is closest or is perfection. And we can look at it simply, just in terms of health, for example, a very uh, physical, material notion of the human body, that we have this notion of a healthy body. It's supposed to look like this, it's supposed to move like this, it's supposed to have these various experiences and these particular kinds of um, sensory responses. And that is what we'll consider as good. And when something is amiss from that idea or that notion of a healthy body, of a perfect uh, working physical body, then what's the immediate answer, or what's the immediate reaction? Well, we should do something about it. Now, that's not to say that if you're feeling unwell and you're feeling some sort of pain, that you shouldn't address that sensation, you shouldn't do anything about it. But we'll take a look at it on a more theoretical perspective, that when there is a feeling or a sensation of pain or discomfort or disturbance in the body, the immediate notion is to get rid of it, to remove it. And I find that sometimes the that kind of idea can feel a little restrictive, for example, or at least for me. I've never found myself quite comfortable with pushing myself to do something when I'm already at a particular level of discomfort. At least now. When I was younger, I was able to push myself to stay up late and wake up in the wee hours of the morning just so I can get things done and uh, really push my physical body so that I can accomplish a lot of things, especially if these things are for a supposed benefit of others. And as I've gotten older, it's been more difficult to do that. But still, somehow, I find myself sometimes at points when I would think that the right answer or the right solution is to just push myself a little more. And I feel a little disappointed that I'm not able to extend my work hours just a bit more so I can do something a little more. But I had to succumb to the limitations of the body, and and that's uh, another discussion on like this whole um, work life balance, you know, notions. But at the same time, that experience can also be something more simple in a way of, for example, if uh, I'm supposed to get back to work or do something after eating a meal, and if I indulge myself a little in that meal, start to feel sleepy, there's a tension between the self that wants to sleep and the self that wants to work. And that other form of disappointment towards the self comes in this idea that I, having known that there would be others, that there's this idea that if you're uh, truly passionate and diligent about the things that you do, that you'd be able to stay up late at night to do it, when I could barely stay up to work in the middle of the day when I'm feeling sleepy. And so it's like there's a notion that I want to rid of myself of the small discomforts before I can find myself ready to do a particular task. Like I wouldn't want to do my work while I'm sleepy because one, I can't, and two, I feel like I have to be at a perfectly healthy state to do it. And somehow there's that notion that yeah, if you're not feeling well on the other side, on one side of the spectrum, if you're not feeling well, then you have to address that first before you can move on to doing the things that you want to do. And on the other hand is this notion that okay, maybe the other solution is to just keep pushing oneself to uh, to do something despite a lot of these things. And I think that kind of imagery shows how we might experience these tensions of good and evil, rightness and wrongness, um, knowledge and ignorance in our day to day lives. That um, sometimes the pursuit is calling us to fight against notions of evil or imperfection, and sometimes the pursuit is uh, addressing the limitations of the physical material world, and which includes our physical material selves, so that we can achieve that notion of perfection. But lately, recently, I had this conversation with someone about being um, the favorite or the best in a certain field or a certain activity. And there's a notion that when someone is acknowledged as being the best at their field, um, there are two general ways to go about it. Outwardly embracing that, yes, I am the best at this. I deserve all of this accolades. Or to be more humble and subtle about it and going like, no, 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 I don't consider myself the best. I perceive no such thing, etc. Um, but uh, if we take a look at that kind of phenomenon, you can see how that's more nuanced than those two possibilities, right? A lot of times when we receive even as simple as a praise or a compliment, we might struggle with um, a preliminary notion of how we might respond to that kind of feedback. And we're going to say there's some who would say just a simple thank you with full confidence, saying, "Yeah, I did well, and thank you for acknowledging that." And the others would reject it, saying that, "Oh, no, no, I don't think that was any good at all whatsoever." And yet, despite those within themselves, they might still carry a more nuanced notions of how they respond. One might acknowledge it and think, regardless of how they responded to the other, might acknowledge it, saying that, yeah, I know I did well. I know why I'm the favorite, I'm the best. And I understand that their evaluation is objective, and I agree with it. And there's also the other side who would say that, oh no, I don't think that's any good, I don't think that's correct, etc. But that's not the point of the discussion now. What I want to think about is that idea of, despite seeing or knowing or acknowledging that one has done something proper or right or good, even, that there's this notion of hesitation of embracing um, the validity or the truthfulness of being good in that particular thing. And I guess there are various reasons as to why that's being done, especially if it's, say, in uh, service oriented kind of field, wherein um, the one who is awarded as the best at something is the best at the kind of work that is supposed to be for the benefit of others. And so there's that irony that um, in their service for others, they're receiving uh, laurels for themselves as well. And um, or that perhaps there's that fear of um, it might have a negative influence on the other people who are in the field as well. Um, Having this outwardly confident notion that you're doing well with your work might have a colleague jealous of the kind of acknowledgement and praise that you're getting. But I guess briefly, I'd like to reflect on that idea of how absurd it is that there's such a strong push, systemic, um, very deeply ingrained in our belief systems of going towards some kind of rightness, of addressing a particular call, and doing well and living a good life. But at the same time, hesitation to acknowledge that one is going towards a certain right or doing something particularly good. And I think that comes that though it may seem quite paradoxical or ironic that uh, deep within our psyches we value this thing, and yet when it comes to us we reject it, or we don't feel as comfortable with it. But I think it's not as paradoxical or as ironic as they're two sides of the same coin. And the coin is this perception that there's a particular kind of good or rightness, that there's a correct answer to life, to lives being lived. And that, let's say, doing something good right now or being acknowledged as you're doing something good means that you're in this particular path. And so the hesitation might come in this perception that, well, I have to then continue along this path or else. And if we think about it, it feels more daunting and disappointing if one has been on the good path and suddenly um, goes astray to a different path, um, versus someone who's been in the wrong path the whole time. Like, if at time A, person A is in the right path, person B is in the wrong path, and at time B, person B is still in the wrong path, and person A is now also in the wrong path, it feels more jarring and consequential for person A to be there as opposed to person B who's always been there. So someone who has been achieving so much in their life would feel more distressed and distraught when they get to a point where they're no longer getting any sort of achievements or acknowledgments, as opposed to someone who has never gotten it in the first place, right? And at the same time, I think also this, in particular ways of, or particular kinds of such acknowledgments or achievements, there is this notion that it's this one image or uh, form to follow and to be. Let's take it in the context of a particular service profession. So, a service profession, working in a field in which um, the profession is not getting a lot of benefits, but is integral to a lot of different things. Without this profession, then most of society won't uh, will eventually collapse or will turn into chaos. But the profession doesn't get much benefits. They're not getting good salary. They're not being treated well. The work hours are terrible, and so and as a service profession, they're working for the benefit of others, both the people they're directly serving and or working with, and the greater good society itself. And so when this person gets this kind of profession gets an acknowledgement or praise of um, that they're the best at what they're doing, that they're really good at what they're doing, there could be um, there might be this idea that uh, because they're addressing a specific or particular good and it's doing well for others and it's helpful to society and it's a morally good action that they have to persist in it uh, because the other people working in the profession aren't good, aren't doing well, because the field and the world needs better professionals in that work, and that the work, albeit negatively impacting them in some way, shape, or form, is positively benefiting the world outside of them. And so, if that person who has been acknowledged as the best or the number one in this profession comes into an existential crisis of thinking, I'm not happy doing what I'm doing, or this isn't addressing everything that I need as a human person, but it's doing good, and I'm here and I'm committed to this particular action, it then becomes a notion of, should I make the selfless choice or be selfish? And on a on the surface look between these words, we would conceive of the word selfless as that of the good and selfish as that of not being good. And so we end up with this notion of the good in which uh, people sustaining or persisting within a system or a field that is um, structurally flawed or unhelpful becomes a good thing. And going outside of it somehow becomes wrong or questionable. Now, are they truly uh, wrong or questionable? Are they truly doing good or not? Um, or is it the other way around, in which uh, trying to do good in a world that is inherently messed up is actually not good, and leaving this world or doing something else is what's good? I don't know. Um, I don't think that's the case or the point. And that's because the whole point is that this whole notion of there being a particular kind of good or bad that is inherently outside of the individual, I think is something that can be better reflected upon. Uh, what do I mean by this? I mean that if at this very moment, um, we find ourselves or understand ourselves to be in a form that is um, still or at the moment in complete wrong, um, not as good as we could be, um, still along the journey towards something else. And what exactly is that something else or end of that journey or idea of good or rightness that we're trying to get to? And what exactly is it that would tell us that we're there and that we're capable of getting there, and that when we get there that it's going to be the fulfillment of our lives. The idea is that I think if we look at how different the various forms of lives are within human lives and even non-human lives, and how there are various manifestations of this concept that we call existence. And it's there's no clean or or comprehensive or nuanced or compassionate way of being able to determine how is it that determine which lives are good and which lives are not good, and how that distinction comes about in the first place. And a lot of times, uh, a life at a particular point seems mildly good, other times seems mildly bad, other times it's just unknown if it's right or wrong. And I think this persistence in trying to develop a particular idea of what's good or what's bad and having an objective understanding of it misses the whole point. And I think the point of it is to try to bypass this whole process of living a life that's just incomprehensible. That perhaps these notions of what is good and what's bad is a way of trying to make sense of something that is inherently nonsensical. Nonsensical, not in a way that there can't be any narrative or meaning to it. That we can, there's a lot of stories that we can get from life, and there's a lot of meaning and wisdom that we can derive from it also. And I think that doesn't have to come with the notion that there's a particular way of perceiving or evaluating existence or life. And to do so, it doesn't mean that one cannot do so much, that one shouldn't engage in discussions of ethics and many similar kinds of notions. But to do so risks losing something that is just as beautiful as the idea of perfection, which is um, uncertainty, spontaneity. I think when some wise being said that they don't know anything, the initial notion might be that oh, it's an intellectual humility. They're embracing that they're seeing oh I'm a limited human being and this is that I can't truly know things. But perhaps we can also perceive that notion as something of an invitation to know nothing and to go through life, to go through things free of these structures of various beliefs and knowledge systems. What kind of experience would that be? How there's no need to perceive whether this one thing is good or not. And that would then make you question once again, if there's no real notion of what is good or what is bad, then why are you doing a particular thing? Right? Or what else would make you do a particular thing? That if there's no evaluation or assessment necessary for a particular action, then why would you do it? Or how would you do it? What kinds of intentions, sensation, phenomena would come about in your experience of having to make choices or having to be faced with something that is incomprehensible? And I think that very notion would allow us to have a more comprehensive understanding of this thing that we perceive as good. That the whole idea isn't that there's no good in the first place at all, but that perhaps it's not going to be completely understood by means of limitations or by means of constricting um, understanding towards a particular manner. That if if one particular action can be good or bad in various circumstances and to various agents, then maybe there's something more fundamental in the idea of good or in the concept of good that is able to transcend those circumstances, those various limitations or various conditions of the world or our existence. And even that very notion of um, having this strict target towards the good, in a sense, can be perceived as um, antithetical to good itself. That if one does actions towards the good because of wanting to be good, then how good is that act truly? Um, some other uh, moral philosophers would say that if the intentions aren't pure or if the intention has to be like this, then it's not it. Some others would say that it's not important. And we can see in our in our daily lives, in our regular day-to-day experiences, how sometimes your intention matters, sometimes it doesn't. And so what kind of experience and understanding is it that is able to transcend those notions of um, having intention, freeing oneself from intention, or having a natural inclination towards particular things? Yeah, I think that's something that would be interesting to reflect on. Yeah. let me know what